Okay, let me first start by saying that I know I have said many times before that my solo trip to Paris and Madrid is the best experience of my life. 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 Maybe I lied. Sorry. If there's any experience that comes close to that one or even slightly tops it, it has to be this Morocco trip. I was super excited about this trip because it was going to be completely different from anything else I had experienced before. As a Nigerian and a West African, I was always fascinated with North Africa, and I was dying to one day visit and compare it to the rest of the continent that I was familiar with. On this trip, it was me and about 12 other students, I think, 2 TAs and our professor. The plan was to spend a month traveling through the country and learning about its economy and its culture, while also doing some pretty intense work, essays, presentations, all that stuff. To be honest, it is probably the most hectic schedule I have ever endured. I mean, we had a freaking 10-page paper due at the airport before our flight. We first arrived Casablanca, where we spent a few days doing some tours and field trips and just preparing for the loaded trip ahead. Then we headed down to Marrakech, where we would spend the bulk of our trip living with Moroccan families and also attending a school called the Center for Languages and Culture, or the CLC. At the CLC, we took Moroccan Arabic classes every day while also doing our own separate coursework with a few guest speakers from time to time. It was so cool to interact with the Moroccan students who were learning English. They were so friendly and just keen to get to know us all the time. And they also spoke in English, which really helped them practice and improve their English. For the rest of us Americans, let's just say we weren't as successful with Moroccan Arabic. But still, it was nice to make new friends and have them as our guides during our stay. Living with my Marrakesh family was my very first homestay experience, and it was awesome. Like, that's where you really get to see culture in full effect. Watching how your family lives, what they do, how they behave, and just trying to replicate all that in an effort to fit in and acclimatize. It's like textbook cultural immersion. We also had to use public transport to get around the city, so it was a test of independence and street smarts to be able to get on the right bus or to haggle with taxi drivers who didn't want to turn on the meter in the car. And those situations were the perfect opportunity to practice the Arabic we had been learning. But I just stuck to French because my Arabic wasn't working out. In the middle of our stay in Marrakesh, we took a 7-hour train ride to the city of Fez, where we spent 1 week. And that was just so cool to experience. Our time there was just so different from anywhere else we had been in Morocco. The scenery and the vibe was just different, even down to the subject matter of the lectures we had in Fez. We learned a lot about vocational schools where people did these amazing arts and crafts and how popular they had become in recent years for Moroccans. And we spent a great deal of time learning about Islam, specifically Sufism, which people tend to describe as the more mystical or deeply spiritual sect of Islam, which is also quite popular in Morocco. I think Fez was just the right setting to learn about these things because it's such an ancient and traditional city that it just felt right learning about these deep and unique things there. The last 2 main things on our itinerary when we got back from Fez were a hike in the high Atlas Mountains, where we would spend 3 days in this village called Tidli, away from modern civilization. That on its own is a whole major story, but it was amazing. And finally, this event called the Intercultural Dialogue, which I like to describe as the main event of the trip. This intercultural dialogue experience really opened my eyes to a lot of things, so I felt led to focus a bit more on that in this video. Now, the term intercultural dialogue is pretty self-explanatory. It is basically an open and respectful exchange of views between people of different cultures in order to gain a deeper understanding of their worldview. So the plan was to spend a nice weekend in this place called Ourika, which is this lovely rural town outside Marrakesh. We actually spent a few days beforehand doing some preparations and establishing a set of ground rules all together to guide our conversations that weekend. So we took a bus from Marrakesh to Ourika, and then we walked 25 minutes with our backpacks and sleeping bags to the farmhouse where we would stay that weekend. It was such a rustic and beautiful place. Like when you think of the perfect getaway location, this was it. It had a beautiful garden with a lot of space and a swimming pool with such a cool, earthy design. And the guys and girls had separate buildings and a separate swimming pool as well. So we were divided into 4 or 5 groups, I think, and most of our time that weekend was spent in our groups just talking. There were 2 mediators in each group, and their job was to make sure the conversations were staying on track and that nobody was getting left out of the conversations. I have to say I loved my group because we all just got along so well, and I think we did pretty well in respecting one another in the conversation. So there was a kind of special bond. At least I think there was a special bond. During every session that weekend, each group had a list of topics to choose from to talk about. We talked about issues like gender roles in the home, marriage and divorce, women in the workplace, religion, the taboo in Moroccan society around sex, sexual orientation, death, all sorts of issues. And we were actually encouraged to ask one another difficult questions as far as we were comfortable with. And that was quite challenging because you could quite visibly see how uncomfortable some of us were with being pressed to dive even deeper into an already uneasy topic. So it was quite fascinating for me to see how we all got around that with our own cultural biases and opinions. But this was also a time for us foreigners to ask the Moroccans about things we found odd or unsettling about Moroccan culture, and vice versa as well. A lot of misconceptions were cleared and a lot of questions were answered that weekend. And what I loved was that as a Nigerian, I could relate to a lot of what the Moroccans were saying. And as an international student in the USA and someone who's been exposed to American culture for so long, I could also relate to what the Americans in the group were saying as well. So it was like really eye-opening for me. After every session, we would have a break and then all the groups would come together and we would talk about what our experiences were like in the group discussions. I'm not gonna lie though, in the big group discussions, sometimes some people said some really outlandish things, but I guess that's the whole point of the conversation, you know, like how do you deal with those comments that make you feel uncomfortable? You just have to learn to handle them respectfully. It's always better to ask questions or probe for a deeper conversation than to just say from the get-go, oh, you have such a shitty way of thinking. We also had a few icebreaker games, team building activities, and skits to present in front of everyone. And with all the cheers and laughs and good conversations, it just created an atmosphere of friendship and respect. And that just made everybody feel comfortable. It was just a chill and productive weekend. The environment was immaculate and peaceful. The food was to die for. And the conversations were just so profound. So what did I learn from this whole experience? Firstly, for intercultural dialogues of any kind to work, you need a few things in place. Participants on both sides need to have an open mind and willingness to learn and understand. Everyone needs to be respected equally. Participants need to engage in conversation willingly. And there needs to be a common language for understanding and respecting cultural differences. And once these things are established, then the dialogue can truly serve its purpose. It isn't a competition or a time to show that your way is correct or better than any other way that there is. It's a conversation. To take it a step further, I think all of this should be applied to everyday life, not just in these special sit-downs that have been arranged for a group of people. We should approach our interactions with people like this, especially when you're dealing with people of different backgrounds and cultures. You know, sitting through the conversations and just participating in everything we did, I realized 2 things. And the first is that cultural diversity is essential to human society. And the second is that respectful dialogue between cultures is the least we can do to tackle the issues of discrimination, racism, and xenophobia, amongst many others, and to begin to promote peace. With the internet and advances in telecommunications, the world has become increasingly interconnected. More and more, we're being exposed to different people, different cultures, different ways of life and thinking. And that also comes with the possibility of judgments and misconceptions on our part. There's a lot of hatred and conflict in the world today, mostly as a result of people not being willing to have respectful dialogue or listen to an opposing side and work together to create mutually beneficial solutions. We tend to emphasize differences and shortcomings more than we do similarities and strengths, and all that does is just empower the us versus them mentality, which keeps the door open for more misunderstandings, more false judgments, and essentially more conflict. I think our time on Earth is more fulfilling when we're eager to learn about other ways of life and observe them with an open mind, when we're ready to clear out all the misconceptions we have, all the false judgments, the false narratives that we have been told and that we carry, when we reflect on our own practices and respect differences, when we celebrate one another with respect. You don't have to start practicing every new thing you've learned about, and you shouldn't let yourself get sucked into something you are uncomfortable with. Establish boundaries and keep your wits about you, but don't be so quick to be dismissive of something new or different. What makes cross-cultural dialogue work is the willingness to learn and the readiness to share. There are bound to be disagreements, it's a given, and that's fine, but just be respectful about it. It isn't always easy, but I firmly believe that if everyone got into the habit of dialoguing respectfully, then seeds of global restoration and hope will be sown. And maybe one day we'll be able to look back and see just how far we've come as a human race. This is a very kumbaya kind of message. But it's true though, at least I like to think that it is. There is so much more I want to say about Morocco, but I could honestly go on for days, so we'll just cut it here. It is my favorite country, by the way, and by far the most immersive travel experience I've had. And dare I say, the best experience of my life. Where have you heard that one before? Actually, I don't even, man. You know what? Let's just say top two. Top two experiences of my life so far. Well, I hope this made some sense and resonated with you a bit. I would love to hear or read your thoughts about cross-cultural dialogue as well. So please feel free to put them in the comment section below and maybe we can dialogue. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Take care and I'll see you soon.